Hi, everybody. Really happy to be here. My name is William Chen. I'm the Ecosystem Development Lead of OpenZeppelin. So a little bit as we get started, what is OpenZeppelin? You may know us from other ecosystems, mainly Ethereum. And we build the bedrock smart contracts that power DeFi. We've been an auditor for 10 years in smart contract ecosystems, and our contracts have powered over $25 trillion of value transferred, and we support more than 84% of all TVL in DeFi. As we move into a programmable world, it's really important to have safe, audited code, because oftentimes the smart contracts that power new applications are the last line of defense. Right? So whether they're audited beforehand, they're built with pre-audited modules, these are the important primitives that you need to get smart contract applications out. So today we're going to talk a little bit about ecosystems. Right? Ecosystems, they're not something native to Web3, but very frequently they form the underpinning of all the products, protocols, and growth. And so it's useful to get started with a little bit about what is an ecosystem, right? You can think of an ecosystem as an interconnected network of different participants. It may be users, they may be developers, maybe liquidity providers. You have technology, you have applications, and these are all united inside the same economy, right? Where participants derive value from the interactions with each other and can participate in shared governance, how to evolve the rules of the network and the participation going forward. I like to think of it like a city, right? In a city, you have many participants, you have people, right? And in blockchain, that might be users and developers. You have businesses, right? And those might be the apps, the tooling, the services, the infrastructure. And you have infra, right? Those in a city are the roads and utilities. And in blockchain, those are the smart contract protocols and smart contract standards that you have. And the important question to ask is, how do you get people to come to your city? And how do you get people to stay? Right? And those are the same questions that we ask when we're building ecosystems in Web3. So traditionally in business, right, we have a few different models of how to grow. The first one that kind of everybody is familiar with is really product market fit. Right? I'm sure you've heard of this. When you iterate your product to make it different in some way and better, right? Maybe it's faster than alternatives, maybe it's better, right, quality-wise, or the experience, or maybe it's cheaper, right? It could also be simpler, right? And so you make changes to the product or service to attract more users. The second model, which really kind of took off with the internet boom and is really native to Web3 also, is network effects. And network effects is where a product is more valuable, not because the product is different or it has more features. It's more valuable because it has more participants. And so when I was getting ready for this talk, and I was talking to my wife, right, to kind of explain these concepts, she instantly got it because she remembered when she first joined Facebook, right? She got an invitation to join. At the beginning, nobody else was there. She wasn't sure what to expect, and she didn't really find a reason to stay, right? But after a certain amount of time, let's say fast forward a year, all of her friends were on it, right? And all of a sudden, as soon as she joined the network, she could instantly see the value. So when we're talking about ecosystems and we're talking about starting networks, the most important concept is critical mass, right? This speaks to the difficulty to start a new ecosystem, to bootstrap it, but it also talks about the incredible benefits, right? When we have an ecosystem that is sustainable, right? It's self-sustainable. So that's really the point of starting an ecosystem, and you can kind of think of it like the exit for an ecosystem, right? As opposed to maybe an IPO in Web2, right? This is the goal of what you're trying to build towards. So early on in the life of the ecosystem, it's quite difficult to attract users. Like we said before, money that you pour into growth of an ecosystem can result in high attrition because by default, when the users join, they don't find enough value to stay. But after the critical mass point, and you can think of it as a tipping point, right, in a network or an inflection point, there growth becomes self-sustaining, right? It's much easier to organically attract users, and every dollar that you pour into growth naturally results in much more usage and value. And the people that join discover value as soon as they become part of the network. And so the question is, how do we get to this critical mass point? And for this, I want to encourage you to think of what is the minimum viable ecosystem. So just like we have a minimum viable product in Web 2, when we deal with networks, and especially in Web 3, think about building towards the minimum viable ecosystem. Remember, you have to invest in order to get to the critical mass point. So you really need to pay attention to what you're investing in. And the suggestion here is really to niche down, right? Think about what vertical or verticals, right? Especially in the context where we have competition from many, many different blockchains and ecosystems today, right? But where do you want to get started? What subset of verticals do you want developers or users to focus on where they can find value from interacting with each other? And that's the point that you want to start with. And then, once you hit the critical mass point for this minimum viable ecosystem, then expand outwards to a larger one. And so frequently, you might think of, do you want to go for developers first or users first? And I think if you're coming in with an existing business, you may already have existing developers, you may have a pool of users to pull from, right? Then you're kind of starting at a good place, and then you can expand that into an ecosystem. Another example is you might want to build the killer app yourself, right? And so famously, I think Hyperliquid, right? You build this protocol first, and then you expand later. But if you're starting from kind of more of a general purpose view, then the recommendation really is to start with developers. The question is, how can you reduce friction for bringing developers into the ecosystem? And that might come from shared libraries. It might come from enabling faster deployment cycles, from tooling, enabling composability. But remember, you need to focus on the developers that create that minimum viable ecosystem that you want to create. And another concept that helps us here is really thinking about protocol network effects. So if we can go down one level from, I guess, the user-facing external network effects, when you're going for developers, you want to think about how you can build the protocol around code reuse. So these are building blocks that developers can use to get started. Composability primitives, and enabling developers to build composability into their protocols. And simplified porting, meeting the expectations of developers from other ecosystems. And the key here is that you want every developer that's coming into the ecosystem that you acquire to contribute value that can then be used by newer developers, right? So you're building up to the critical mass point for developer usage of the ecosystem. And then that helps build towards the critical mass point for the larger ecosystem itself. And the last point I want to make here is to talk a little bit about sustainability, right? So again, the goal of an ecosystem, the goal of growth, is to create this city that sustains itself, right? Where the participants get value from each other, new business, new protocols are created, they all contribute to the running of the economy, and the fees from the ecosystem can fund the continued development and the continued growth and continued creation of value for the ecosystem itself. But what you have to watch out for is that it's always possible to lose network effects, right? Again, to other protocols, to other ecosystems that are out there. We see kind of change over time, especially in the tech-enabled world where change happens so quickly. So think about, once you get to the sustainability point, maintaining the network effects. And so I'll leave you with some final takeaways here. So remember at the beginning, you need to balance growth from product improvements and growth from network effects. Remember that ecosystem growth is nonlinear, right? You're going to invest outsized at the beginning in order to acquire users to get to the critical mass point. And then afterwards, it becomes much easier to be sustainable. So you need to be smart in how you do that, right? Think about what's part of the minimum viable ecosystem and invest in things that get to that point and successfully expand from there. A lot of times when you're going to do that, you're going to bootstrap the developer side of the ecosystem first with dev tools, templates, incentives, and finally defend your networks for network effects for sustainability. So thank you very much today. I think we're at the end of the time. Happy to engage with anybody afterwards and talk about Open Zeppelin, talk about network effects, and talk about how you build businesses in Web3.